But anyway, today I'm going to touch upon a number of things. I'm going to go over that here in a little bit. I apologize that the screen, the big one, is broken. So we're doing it on here. Some of my PowerPoint slides are a little small, but I'm going to go over it with you. I'll read it. I'll make sure that you can read it. I don't want to leave you high and dry. So with that said, we'll go ahead and start her up. We're recording. So we are recording the meeting. I'm going to ask you to hold all questions until the end. After we finish recording, then we will turn it off and then you can ask the questions. But anyway, our goal here is to record it, and then we're going to put it on one of the TV channels, and we're also going to put it on the web. So other residents can see this, because really, this is really for everybody's benefit, not just the few people that are in this room. But this is a start. When the Emergency Preparedness Committee asked me to do it, it was let's plant some seeds. Let's start getting people thinking about this, probably a little bit more than we've done before. So hence here we are. So anyway, that's my introduction already made there, but it is a joint presentation by the Emergency Preparedness Committee and the Technology Committee. Both of us, each of us are the chairs of those two committees. And it's really two committees working together, which is really what needs to occur around here. And for this topic, it will gradually involve all the committees and all the entities around here working together. And you'll see that before you leave today. So the agenda, I want to break it out. What we're going to do, I'm going to start off making my opening comments, and then I'm going to do some reflections. I'm going to talk about things that why you want to think about this, and some events that have occurred in history that you might be able to relate to, and you can say, oh, I see how this would fit into addressing those particular things. Then we'll talk about what is a continuity of services plan. When you walk out here today, you'll have a pretty good idea of what that means. It's not some vague thing out there in the world of running a business. All businesses and a lot of entities besides businesses have these. And I'll show you some of those here in a little bit. So why Leisure World needs one. I'm going to go over that today. When you walk out, you'll have a pretty good idea why we should be doing this. And then we'll do a little bit about the consequences of not having one. What are some of the problems you can have if you don't have one? And I'll be able to give you some examples of that. The next one is I'm going to do a case study. In my career, I mentioned earlier, I've done about 20 years I did this. One of the companies that I worked for, I did a business continuity plan for them, and we actually had a disaster in which we used our plan and recovered. And I'm going to show you that today briefly. The next thing is the next steps for residents in Leisure World, the things that we as individual residents and what Leisure World, be it the trust, mutuals, and all, things that they should be looking at to move forward. And then we'll have time, we'll turn off the recording, and then we'll do Q&A. We'll let you ask questions, and then closing comments. So moving on a little bit, just to touch a little bit more about what I've started to say. I've been done business continuity planning or continuity of services planning. About 20 years of my 50 years, I was involved in that in one way or another. Did a lot of different things, and you'll see where that come out in today's presentation. I also oversaw that included the concept, the planning, the design, implementation, training, testing, maintaining of two major plans for two major companies. It wasn't little tiny things. One required, and you'll see that in a little bit, where recovery wasn't measured by days, it was by hours. You had to come back up on certain mission critical things, and I'll show you some examples of that today. The other thing is, I just mentioned what I just said there, but that is an important factor. When you put together a plan, you got to look at all the different scenarios. You got to look at what's mission critical, what's important to you and your entity. What would it mean to us if we lost XYZ in the community for a period of time? What would that do to us? Let's take an example. What if all of our financial institutions weren't available to us? What would that mean? What would we do? So these are things I want you to think about. The next thing, I was responsible for the execution of the recovery. the CEO of the company, when we had this disaster at 4 o'clock in the morning, calls me, Dave, we got a problem. And I went in and we implemented our plan. And I'm actually going to do a case study today. I'm going to show you that. I spend a lot of time on it, but you'll be able to see what we did and how we did it. It was pretty interesting. So introduction, just kind of highlight, I won't necessarily read this, just kind of highlights what I've just said to you, the things that we'll do. And I want to make this really very informative for you and not just skim over things. I'm going to dive deep in a few things that are really important points that you want to make sure you pick up on. And then the real world case study, this what I'm going to tell you actually happened. This is not, I didn't make this up. And then we'll conclude with the questions and answers, and we'll go over that. We'll spend whatever time we need to make sure we answer your questions. We want you to walk out of here and feel like, okay, I got something out of this. Opening reflections. Now, this is where I'm going to now talk about a couple of things that have already, all of us, have affected us at one point in our lives. So with that said, do you remember when the small plane struck the power lines in Gaithersburg? You remember that?
Yeah.
I do. And you know, what did that do? How did that affect us? And I'm going to talk about that in a minute. I'm going to give you some examples of what happened that day by having some people being prepared actually helped a couple of things. And then we'll also talk about what would you do differently? And I want to know, because I want you to think about what would you do differently today that you didn't either think about or didn't do during that event. So with that said, let me talk about what I did for that event. I won't call myself a prepper, but having done business continuity planning and stuff like that for a long time, I have certain things in place at my house, and these are things you might want to consider. So when the power went out, obviously none of us had electricity, or at least I think it affected the entire community. There's no electricity. So if you were in the middle of something or doing something that, gee, you having had electricity would have been helpful. So after that went out, when people on my street looked over at my house, here my lights are on inside my house. Why? Because I had not a generator, but I had a power center. And that power center was portable. And I could actually bring up, I had lights on. If I needed to put on something like an appliance, I could do that. Well, my one neighbor across the street, her husband, who was not only handicapped, was also had a lot of health issues. And when the power went out, he was stuck in his lift chair and he was way up. He couldn't get out. He was stuck. And this man was 80 some years old and very frail. And she called me and says, I don't know what to do. I said, I'll be right over. I took my power unit, went to his house. I took his thing, unplugged it, plugged mine in. It came up, lowered it down, and let him out. So that's preparedness. And those are things you want to think about. Now, I'm not advocating that if we have an outage like that, everybody call me because I can't answer for 5,560 homes. But it's things that I was prepared for. I also prepare for things like there's something called a go bag, which we're going to talk about. I have one of those. I even have little things for my car, special starter generators, special flashlights, things like that. These are things you want to think about. And I'm going to touch more upon that today. Now, one more near and dear to our hearts. Y'all remember this date? 24 years ago today? Boy, do I remember it. I was at work and one of my staff walked into me. Oh, by the way, that company was at the time was the same company we had this flood, which was a year and a half later after this. But we had just the day before this, we had signed a contract with a hot site provider. And I'll explain what a hot site provider is. I mean, that's a company that will help you restore and maintain business and do all those types of things. So we had that in place, which was significant. But the things that affected all of us, and I don't care where you were at, particularly on the East Coast, but in the country, you were affected by this. And that was your ability to make a phone call. You remember that? Good luck. Why? Because your companies like Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, when they build these cell systems that are out there, they're designed based upon average usages. So in other words, let's say in a region that they, as a company, have 1 million subscribers. They go and look and say, gee, on an average minute, 200,000 of those are using their phone. That's just a number I just picked out of random. That's not necessarily what it is. So they designed the system to be able to meet those needs. But when you start having 300,000 or 400,000 people out of that million trying to call, you lock the system out. It can't handle it. So we weren't able to do it. And I just want to mention, this is where the one area where people always ask me about our emergency call system we have here. The one call now, you all get that? If you are not signed up for all 3 ways that you can get messages, you're making a mistake. Because you want to make it so that you can get text messages, you can do phone calls, and you can do the internet. Why? Because if any one of those fails, and that happens to be the one you're on, you're stuck. So the other way, at least you have the possibility of one of those potentially working for you. So you want to be thinking about that, and then having a business continuity plan or continuity services. These are the types of things you're going to bring to the surface. So we ran into that problem. We ran into transportation, getting around the country, traveling. My father-in-law was getting ready to get on a plane, couldn't get on it, couldn't go. He had a very important meeting to go to. He was stuck. Now, do our plans here account for that? No, but it's making yourself conscious of these things and what are your alternatives. I know our CEO of our company I was working for at the time actually had gone to a board meeting in Seattle, Washington. So there they were stuck. They couldn't fly back because it was a while before the airplanes started flying again. So they ended up renting a car and driving across the country. And they wanted to get back so quick. I think he said they got like 9 tickets, speeding tickets, because they were trying to get back. But that wasn't well thought out. But what had happened is that we had this plan in place, and we had a Hot Site, which is a company that will help you restore. We had just signed that contract, and he got some rave reviews on that one, and they were very happy about it. And I'll touch more about that in a little bit. So it's really remembering what. Oops, boy, I just got all happy there with my hitting that button there. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry I hit too much. Boy, that was touchy, that little screen there. Isn't that special? Oh, come on. I am so sorry here. I must have hit something. Oh, there we are. So the reflection here now is, go back that one. So remember what you did, the things that affected you, and today, what would you do differently? Whatever those may have been that day, think about what you would do differently if that same type of scenario happened. Now you're probably sitting there asking yourself the question, well, that's only one type of problem. What do I do for the others? That's where this planning comes into play for the community, where we can bring to the surface people's knowledge and their awareness. The old adage I always use is one's world is as big as one's consciousness. So the more consciousness we can make you of these types of services and things that are available, the better we're all going to be. And that's where the Emergency Preparedness Committee all comes into play. So really thinking about that, I want you all just to really think, okay, what would I do differently if it happened again? All right, moving on now. Possible consequences of not having a plan. Okay, let's see, I can read my thing here. Disruption of essential services. This is things you have to look at, and we as a community need to decide what those are. What are our essential services? What do we, residents here, expect from the trust, from the community, from the board that will be in place if we were to have a catastrophic disaster? And I don't mean just a little building catching on fire. Not that that's not catastrophic for some people, but it's not necessarily affecting a mass amount of people here. It's affecting certain people. But having something in play of what that looks like. I can think one, finances, financial. What if all the banks, and I mentioned that earlier, what if they shut down? What would you do? Well, having a certain amount of cash on hand is always helpful. I say, okay, I may or may not be able to do that. There's the things you can do. So thinking about all of those things you want to do and what you might need to have in place is very important. Okay, so resident vulnerability. This is now, and I need to move this forward, that screen right there. It's so tiny.
You can push it forward.
Yeah, I'm gonna push it forward a little bit. So those with medical or health issues could be very vulnerable. how are they going to be addressed? What are we going to do for those people? Not that we as a community necessarily end up doing something for them, but what are the options? And you need to be able to relay that to those people, what those options are they have. Next one is breakdown in communications. I've already talked about that. We had it for two events. We had the airplane and then the 9/11, in which that can break down. So what happens if all of our cell service, cell towers were out, the cell service was out, regular landlines were down, you couldn't make it, what would you do? What would be your backup? How would you get in touch with family and friends? Well, think about that. How would that play out? And you're going, well, what if it's all down? What am I going to do? Well, that needs to be looked at. And that leisure world, maybe as an entity, needs to look at that. Next one, I already mentioned that. So it's channels. Delay in responses and recovery. So if you don't have a plan, then if something happens to occur, let us say it was a regional disaster. It affected a lot of people in the area. And now you've had you're part of this and something's come up and you need to be able to get help from either a company or another entity. If you didn't have a plan, but these other 10 people had a plan and they had contracts in place with these companies, who's getting service first? They are. We're not. So you need to put that in play. And when I get to tell you about the flood that we had all that in play. So I had people responding to us and at our site in a couple of hours versus could be days, weeks, or whatever if I didn't have it accommodated properly. So really making sure you're covering all of that. Financial losses, what the community can lose. What if we couldn't make our payments? What if other parts of the country were still usable and the trust had to make payments to them? How would all that unfold? Now, maybe initially it may be sort of okay, but a prolonged period of time is a problem. Now, you ask yourself, well, gee, if it's this catastrophic, what does that mean? Well, it depends, because it depends on the scenario that happens. But you need to look at if that's important to us individually, as a mutual, as the trust or whatever, you want to make sure you've addressed that. That's what I'm really touching on here. So next one is, get my reputational damage. Is not having a plan. What does that do to the community, its reputation? That, gee, we let our residents down, we let all different things, we really did not do what we should have done. Hence why having this becomes a very important part of running the community. It should be an integral part. In the two companies that I did it, it was no longer a, well, I think we should do this. It was an integral part of the way we tested. We involved people, we had things in play, we actually audited it. We audited our plans because that made it so that we knew we were in play. So the next one, regulatory and legal issues. This is another item. There may be issues that may become that we have to have certain things in place, either law or regulatory. That needs to be looked at. I know the one company I worked for, absolutely regulatory things had to be in play. Why? Because it was a financial institution. It needed to have this in play. If something happened, they had billions of dollars at stake. So it wasn't like it was a little deal. So the next one is permanent loss of data and records. The other, you look at, I mean, this is near and dear to my heart because you have computers and people where they store their stuff. Well, if you store it on your desktop and that's the only place you have it, and that machine dies during a disaster, or you have something called an EMP, which is electromagnetic pulse, which is what they think when if we had a world war, and I'm like, yeah, scare you off with that one. That would be what would bring us to our knees, because every electronic device you can think of is going to come down. It's going to stop working unless you do. There's a couple things you can do in place, but and I'll get to that in a little bit. But you want to be thinking about all of that as to how you would handle that. The next one is failure of governance and what do they say there? Leadership. So you need to make sure that that is able to stay in place to whatever degree we deem necessary to continue operating. What you will typically find when you have a disaster, and this is probably the biggest thing to deal with, is people will set their own priorities to what's important to them. Most people in a severe disaster family is going to come first. So they may not be available anymore. They may not be there to help you. They're going to go. They're going to take care of family. And I've seen it before. And being to make sure they've got their own comforts in place and they can react to that. So something else to think about. And then potential for greater casualties of harm, the other things that can happen to you. These are things you need to take into consideration. So these are just some highlights of why having a plan is important. And again, I've touched upon it. We could talk hours on this and dig deeper as to other things you want to take into consideration, but these are things you want to make sure you're thinking about. All right, so developing a plan. You want to plan it and you want to prepare. And I'm going to step you through today the steps, high level, that we as a community should do to look at bringing a plan to the front, making it a reality. And it's not just going, oh, well, let's just do that. Let's do this. Let's do that. No, that will not work. Nor can it be such that, oh, well, the trust will go do this and that mutual will do that and that mutual will do that and that committee will do that. It won't work. You have got to do it as a unified solution for all people concerned. Because why? You may have a plan for one group in which Mary Jane is part of, but Mary Jane may need to be part of something else. And what do you do? So you have to think about that. So you want to plan and then prepare. And I'll touch upon that as we move further here. So what should we plan for? These are some of the common ones, and I'm going to go deeper in a little bit. Fires. Now, we've experienced that since I've been here 10 years. I think there's been 2 that I know of. We had, was it 19B? And then we had Montgomery Mutual had a building that burnt down. So now they're more isolated, but what if it was something bigger? An explosion caused fires or something. Health events, we've seen that. We saw the COVID. Yeah. And honestly, while it was bad, there are things out there that could be a whole lot worse that we just didn't see. Winter storms. Now, they're claiming this winter may be a little rough for us. What do we do? If you can't get out or whatever, how do you prepare for that? And thinking about this plan, you're not thinking about just the big thing. You need to put your arms around it and think about the smaller thing, which is you. You need to be part of your decision-making, how you're going to address this. But we have flooding, which can happen, utility failures. We've seen that already. Terrorism. And I'll tell you, I remember on the one company I worked for, this is before 9/11, before we had our plan, it was probably a year earlier. I was in his office and we were talking about what do we prepare for? What does our plan prepare us for? And you have to decide what that is. And nothing's on an even playing field. Each one is unique in itself. And sometimes one's dependent on another. And you got to take that into consideration. So when you're doing your plan, you go, okay, I'm going to cover the various things. Well, I remember getting to the topic of terrorism. But keep in mind, this was before 9/11. He looked at me and said, nah, it's not going to happen. I said, really? I said, what if the scenario that something completely unexpected happened? Not that I had all the answers or I had a magic ball that I knew this was coming. I didn't. But I said, we at least need to have it part of our plan and mentioned about scenarios that we might want to address. Because one of the things that was talked about were things like dirty bombs. Anybody know what I'm talking about? It's where they actually bring a bomb in and they set it off. And that can be,
but it's radioactive.
Yeah, radioactive use. You can have a lot of problems. Yeah. So you need to look at these things and you're saying, okay, well, gosh, we've lived here all these years. We've never had this happen. Well, all it takes is once. And then it's happened. Talk about the people in New York. They probably never happened. They won't tell you that anymore. And then, which to me looking at where the world is heading, probably the most likely significant event that would require a plan would be cybersecurity attacks, cyber attacks, where they're going to shut us down, all of our infrastructure, our utilities, water filtration, electricity, and it can be done. And us protecting ourselves is a daunting task. It's daunting. So you need to do that in the community, because we really are a city. We need to have that as part of what we're looking at. We're not just going to skim over that. Oh, that's the county. It's not. So our next one now is the types of disasters. I want to just kind of touch on a little bit more. It's touching what I just said, but severe storms and hurricanes. Now, while here we don't typically see real strong hurricanes here, that doesn't mean it won't happen. It has happened in history. In my lifetime, I've lived in this area all my life, 70 some years. I'm just a child, I know, but I've seen pretty bad hurricanes come through here, and that did damage to some things. So you want to allow for that and cover that. And they talking about global warming and things affecting our atmosphere and our environment. So we need to make it part of our plan. And I want to go back and I want to repeat a couple things one more time to you. One of them is not all of these things are done on an equal level. You look at risk versus cost. You say, okay, my risk of this happening is percentage-wise is N. My cost is N 20-fold. So do you say, okay, do I compromise and come up with something in the interim, or do I go ahead and say, I'm going to cover the worst case scenario? Cover for the worst case scenario for all types of emergencies is not prudent. I would not tell you to do that. It's not. And when I get a little bit further down, you'll see some of that. But it really needs to be well thought out as to what has the biggest impact on us. To me, things like communications in the community, that's really important. Financial needs to be important. Our infrastructure is important. Those things you want to make sure you got a little more covered. Things that are less likely to happen, or if they did happen, it probably wouldn't play out versus something of all the utilities going out. That just could be different. So just keep that in mind. Power grid failures, and that's kind of touching on the other ones. Very real. You've seen these brownouts. You've seen things. I think it was New York a couple of years ago. They had a huge area that lost power for quite a while. If you all remember that up in New York. So could that happen here? Of course. In fact, just the other day, there was a fire at one of the Pepco, was it yesterday or the day before? One of the Pepco places here in Washington caught on fire. Pardon me?
Transformer.
Yeah, caught on fire. So could that have gotten worse? Probably. Flooding. Probably flooding right here is not as possible, but the flooding could be things around us that could get blocked and stopped that could affect our lives. We need to take and consider that. So don't always look at it as a direct that will affect me. You want to look at it as, gee, if that happened anywhere around me, how would that affect me? So the next one moving on is winter storms. This year they're saying might be a little bit tricky. So having winter storms, I remember the first year I moved in here, 2015, so it must have been January 16, 2016. We had a horrendous snowstorm. I took pictures of the front of my house and I had snow coming over the side, frozen down about this far, hanging down. I'm going, oh my God. If that was on a building you walked under, hopefully it doesn't fall and hit you. That's a problem. So we need to allow for that. And sometimes snowstorms, things like that can affect our utilities, comfort, roadways, getting out, doing things. You want to look at that. So, and then of course fires, we've talked about that. That may be on a smaller scale, but what if it was a large fire, maybe not in the community in which we are affected by hazardous materials being spewed into the air because of a fire? What do you do about that? Next one is cyber attacks. I really talked about that. That can affect your banking, all of these things. You need to take a look at that. Again, you weigh out the risk versus the cost. Telecommunications failures. It happens. We've seen it. I mentioned it earlier. So you want to be prepared for that. But how do you prepare? What do? You can take that decision. Transportation disruptions. What if all of the roads around us were blocked? or there was martial law or something, what would you do? How would you address that? Both on an individual basis and as a community, where our employees couldn't get to work, they couldn't come in here. What would you do? How do you address that? Hazardous materials incidents. I sort of touched upon that just now. Look at the place up in Ohio, the train derailment that happened. Oh, those poor people. It's been what, 2 years, 2.5 years that it happened. And they're still dealing with it. Yeah, they're still dealing with it. That's a shame. That's a real shame. That's because, well, part of it, they may not have a plan, nor did the state, nor did the federal government have a plan what to do with that. Or if they did, they didn't exercise it. And I'm not pointing fingers at anyone in particular. Health emergencies, these can be catastrophic. What do you do? And then terrorism, I mentioned that, and I think it's very real. I think it's a very good possibility that could happen again. And then civil unrest. You could certainly have that. We've seen that in my lifetime in DC. I remember various riots that occurred down there. May not have affected us out here, but what if it got to a larger scale and people went crazy and just didn't care? And for us, while we got gates here that they're guarded, if you had a severe unrest, you could kiss those goodbye. And you may have somebody coming in here and dealing, attacking us. And why would they want to do that? We're probably the more vulnerable ones. And they would look at us, okay, they're older people, we don't care, we'll just go in there and do whatever we want to do. And that's a reality. Okay, so what is the plan? Let's go on now and cover a little bit about that. This is important as some just real brief points. It ensures that essential services, not necessarily all services, essential services continue or are restored after disruption. So you want to make sure that your plan will allow you to do those types of things. And again, what that looks like, it depends. And I'll mention some more of that in a little bit. It is not the same as an emergency response. You need to understand it's not just a particular response. They will focus on immediate safety, and maybe for a select group of people, you want something that's going to address the masses. And what we would do, one as either a mutual or a community or the individually or whatever. And then continuity is daily function, transportation, dining, medical, utilities, communications. Those need to continue in various degrees. And sometimes we'll have to compromise. All right. Why Leisure World needs the plan, I kind of touched upon it. Protection, resilient well-being, preparedness for local risks, minimizing disruption. We want to minimize it, not necessarily always eliminate it, but minimize it. Because again, remember, it's talking about probability versus cost. Safeguarding community assets, all the assets we have, all these buildings, our bank accounts, all the various things we have, we want to do what's necessary to protect those the best we can. And then improved coordination. We want to make sure that we have the cooperation between all these entities, as I mentioned earlier before. Again, you cannot piecemeal this solution. All right, stronger resident confidence. You want to make sure that whatever you do, people are looking at it and going, I feel okay about that. That makes me feel better, that we've got something in place that will help me in the event there is a really bad disaster that happened. That the community's doing it, my mutual's doing it, whatever entities it may be, that they're all addressing that for us, excuse me. And then learning from others. There is so much to be learned about this topic. I'm going to show you some things. You're going to learn from me here on something that happened here. But there's so many things that have happened. Having disasters happens all the time. And those that are prepared for it are the ones that fare better, and things really head in a good direction for them. Regulatory and best practices alignment. You want to make sure that all of that is aligned, that you've got the things in place you need to make sure you're doing the right things legally and just from a practical standpoint, you've got it in place. And then the foundation for recovery. You want to set the foundation for being able to recover in a timely manner. And a timely manner is what you have agreed to is an acceptable timely manner. That will vary from incident and what's actually involved. Okay, so key elements of the plan. So identify your essential services. These are things, and you should have this, I think, as a handout, if I'm not mistaken. You want to identify what are you, and the key word is essential. Not all services, essential. And maybe some of you might be love to play bridge. That's not an essential service. It's something that's nice to have, but it's not essential. So you got to break all that out and say, okay, what are those? Transportation, medical services. If people need to get medical services, what if this medical center is no longer available to us? What happens? Risk assessment. You need to look at the risk. And that's where I was mentioning earlier. Again, they're not all equal. You look at the possibility of a disaster, disruptions, and how it might affect your services. Roles and responsibilities. Assign who does what during an interruption. You need to have players in place ready to help for these things. You can't just go, oh God, we had a fire. Let's see. Bill, he's probably call Bill up. Bill, you need to, no. Bill needs to understand, and he's already well versed in this, and he has the plan, and he knows exactly what to do. And if Bill isn't available, you have somebody else to help fill that in. And you need to have that as part of your plan. We had a very, very detailed structure for how things, based upon the scenario, based upon where it was at, what it was, all of that, what took place. And it requires some thinking, but it doesn't have to be something so freaking overwhelming you just can't ever get it done. Communication plan, you need to have that in play. We have this one call now, which is okay. For our needs, for most of the time, it covers our needs. But in a catastrophic problem, it may not. And I'm saying it won't, I just said it may not. So you want to look at that. Backup systems, make sure you have things as backup options. That can be transportation, whatever. What does that look like? Resource planning. How do you get supplies, water, food, medical, batteries, fuel, all of that? What do you do? How does that play out? So you need to take that into consideration. Oops. Well, I just got trigger happy there with that button. Didn't you see that? Did you all miss that one? Oh, here we go. So vendor, partner, and coordination. This, while you look at it, you go, why do I care about that? I told you we had this flood that occurred at this business because we had a business continuity plan, and we had this thing called a hot site, which is a company that will allow us to take all of our IT services and our staff and move them to this facility where we can continue operations. But as part of that, we had this vast access to services and other companies that would help us get back to business. And in our case, one of the companies we had was a restoration company, commercial. And I remember when I got the call and I showed up at the office and I'm going, holy, and I looked and saw what had happened. I called our hot site and I talked to them, and then I'll explain a little bit when I get to it, but it saved our necks. And you'll see that here in a little bit. All right, testing and training. Just like anything, if you're gonna do something that's really important, you just don't create it, put it in a boulder and set it on the shelf. It ain't gonna work. You gotta test it. We did all of our testing at least twice a year. If it's mission critical, sometimes even sooner. And when something changed, either a piece of software or a piece of hardware or something else, it triggered a response that we needed to reevaluate it again, because you had to make sure that it would continue to go on. Data and records protection. How do you protect data? That's gotten a lot better than it used to be, because it used to be you had it. And I remember the very first job I had was in the early 70s. Big company, and I was in their data center. This is how things had changed. We backed up all of our computers at night onto these big tapes, if y'all remember. And the next morning, not the middle of the night, the next morning, one of us hopped in our car and went down to the local bank that was down there. And in our like a mile from the place, we had a big block box. Popped the tapes in there, took the other set out and recycled them. And that was our backup. no protection on environment really back then. It got better in those places, but it was subjected to potential things that could damage those dates. But that's how we did it. But today, that's very different today. But even though we have such nicer solutions for this today, a lot of people don't take advantage of it. Like if you go to my house, I have, I don't know, 7, 8 computers. None of my stuff is local, none. It's all in the cloud. And it's just a decision I made. So testing, training, and I don't know if you can read the bottom one. I can't see what's the other one.
Reviews and updates.
Yes, review and update. That's what I was just talking about. You need to make sure you do that and make sure that's all in play. Okay. Key consequences, just a couple. I wanted to mention a few of them. Residents could lose access to medical, food, transportation. Employees confused, delayed responses, inability to serve residents. Like I said, if it's big enough a disaster, they're going to care about their family. They don't care about the job. It's survival. Community, longer outages, higher costs, reduced confidence in leadership. You don't want that to happen. You want people to feel like, gee, we're all working on this together. Without a plan, uncertainty grows and recovery is slow and can be very slow and sometimes may not even occur at all if you don't have it thought through. Okay, so let's now move on to here. And this is a real world case. This is this company I work for, a financial company, in which we had a flood and it was significant. It wasn't a little. So here's what happened. The company lost 40% of its office space, 5-story building. And what happened is, and I won't get too in depth, is the city, DC, this was in DC, the city had come in the day before and had put in a new fire hydrant. And they had the jackhammers and they were out there pounding this stuff. And we had a building that was about 55 years old at the time. And the water main, this big, came into the building and they had jarred it. Clearly, they determined that that's what had happened. It jarred it to the point that in the middle of the night, it separated and water poured into that building. Unfortunately, it came in and it came in 1 floor up from the basement. And on that floor happened to be where the data center in my department was, because I was responsible for that. Thank God that when they designed it, they made it a airtight door and all the computers were on a raised floor. We didn't have any damage, but however, around there, everything else was affected. Go down 1 floor, and as the building engineer told me, he says, when I got in and saw him around 6 in the morning, he says, yeah, I've been here for a while. He says, the first thing I went down, and I realized we have almost 2 feet of water in that basement. And everything was ruined. And he had to, because the drains, they hadn't tested the drains. This, by the way, our plan at this point is relatively new. We hadn't done a lot and hadn't gone through all the scenario. And that's why it's important to do testing and all. The few drains that were there weren't capable of handling the amount of water that was coming in. It was incredible. So he ended up taking the toilets, removing them, and lifted them off so that he could use that area to help drain the water. But the building was unoccupied at that time, so it wasn't until he got an alarm from the alarm company that there was a problem, and then he had showed up. So it was a mess, absolute mess. So it affected our ability to operate. We could not operate our business. Why? Because we had to shut our, I ordered the computers to be shut down. Why? Because we had to turn all our power off. We had water in this building. So we had battery backups for those that lasted, again, a business decision. They're not running for days because of the nature of what we did. It ran for certain, so we shut them down to be on the safe side so we didn't cause shorts or problems or things like that. So at that point, everything's unusable. We can't do anything. So we had in place, because we did have a plan, when I got there, I put that plan in place, our business continuity plan. And the first thing we did was to determine the utilities, make sure all was safe there because we wanted the building to be safe. We contacted our hot site vendor, which I'm going to pick up, pull this up here. So couldn't conduct business, 2 feet of water. Let me just go through this here. a loss of utilities, water and power. We had to shut, well, the water we had to shut off because we had that. Mold and asbestos, old building, a lot of asbestos in it. That was a nightmare. We had to account for that. We see that here in this community. We've got it in some buildings. So that becomes a very expensive proposition to do. And that all needed to be mitigated. Data center disruption. We could not support any of our clients. We have a lot of people in our database, hundreds of thousands. And on a given day, we were normally open during the weekday, like 8 to 5. And you might get hundreds of calls a day, but we couldn't service them on that particular day. But we were able to put out a message on our remotely, because we had a remote answering system that was able to tell them we were down, but notify them. But then we had a tree set up that we called the employees. You contacted a person in the department, couldn't get them, you had a second person. And their job was to go around and call everybody to say, don't show up to work today, don't come in. So we had time to do, we need to get that done quickly, because most people would have started coming, leaving to work, 6:37 in the morning, and we were doing that pretty quickly. So we had certain people doing certain tasks, and that will vary depending on, again, the factors in play. We had damaged client documents. Here, you want to talk about a nightmare? Envision this. We had people wanted to get certain resources from us. I don't want to mention the name of the company because for their sake, it's just for privacy. But we had documents people needed to send us to get certain things from us. They had to give us a certified copy, and in some cases, people would send us their original marriage certificate, their birth certificate, their marriage, a bunch of different ones. They all were drenched, soaked. And you think, oh my God, what are you going to do? Well, we had a plan, and we had an agreement with a company that freeze dried all those. And we were able to recover every single one of those documents through that process. But that was because we had a plan, and we had a process in place to address that. And our recovery company, which I'll talk about a little bit, took care of arranged all that for us, got it out of there. They had special equipment. They put it in where they began the freeze dry process. It was amazing, but saved our butts, because that would have been a nightmare. We damaged a lot of computer equipment because all those 2 floors, a lot of the stuff that water was dripping on just ruined it, ruined PCs and desktops and printers and stuff like that. So it got to be a real mess. All right, so now the recovery. This is what we did. So we followed our plan. That was very important. We have a plan, we're going to follow it. That plan was very comprehensive. It was modular. It was broken out to address different types of scenarios. And we went through and we made sure that we stuck by it. We also made it so that we would learn as we went along, because you can't guarantee you've covered everything, but we really tried to make sure we covered as best we could. So the next one is we address communications needs, internal and external. And I just talked about that. You need to make sure internally you're keeping everybody posted, and also externally. What does that look like? You got to make sure that's in play. Next one is notify the hot site vendor. That I did really early on so I could get these other people there. And I did something that you go, what is he talking about? I put them on notice, but we did not declare a disaster. What? So a disaster implies you do not believe, or you not feel that you will be able to come back up and operate and continue doing business within a predetermined time frame that you've decided is what you need to do. We fortunately were not in a position, or needed to be, where I have to restore something in hours. We could go days. People just said, I'm sorry, we'll delay. And for when we made payments, all of that was electronically done and scheduled ahead of time. So it was very well thought out. So I did that. It saved us thousands and thousands and thousands. If you declare a disaster, they're now turning over all their resources, their computers, their space, their office stuff. It's very expensive. So however, because we had the plan and we had this relationship, I remember getting off the phone, and the hot site had multiple locations. In fact, that company had reciprocity with a lot of different companies throughout the country. So if you had a regional disaster and their hot sites were full and you weren't the first one to claim it, we could have options to go elsewhere, which was significant. So we did that. I called them, they happened to be at that point in Gaithersburg, we were in DC. In about 90 minutes, the CEO of that company was sitting outside coming to me going, what do you want me to do? That is priceless, that you got the resource. Even though they declared a disaster, they knew that we had a problem. They wanted to protect our relationship. Not saying everybody would do that, but man, did they step up and help us. It was incredible. So things you want to look at. We prioritized the utility restoration. We needed to get water set, that turned back on because you can't go in there. And then we needed to do when we would come back up with the electricity. Couldn't turn that on until the water was mitigated out of the building. Well, the restoration company came in, when they were there, that's what they focused on. They had pumps and all this stuff here because it was draining slow from earlier. They were getting all that out of there. And then they began the process of drying it all out. It was pretty massive, but it needed to be done. We prioritized recovery, what needed to be recovered first? What was the important things that we needed to do to get business back up as usual? So we came with that and we set up teams of people. We had part of our plan, we had teams that they were responsible for doing certain things. And then we prioritized the data and document recovery. We made sure that we did the certain things that needed to be done first. Partnership with cleanup, repairs, and business continuation. So we had a primary company that was a sub to our hot site that they took responsibility for all the cleanup, for all the repairs, everything, because we had to take off all the drywall, had to take everything off to mitigate the mold. We had to remove all the asbestos tiles because once they get wet, that's a problem. So you have to look at all of that. So we dealt with that, and then we restored business operations one business day. That happened to be Friday. That's the only day that we did not operate. Because what we were able to do that day, had it not been the weekend, it probably would have taken a little bit longer. We were able to make arrangements to get replacement, leased, rented, computers, desks, things like that, which are shipped to us expedited over the weekend and worked on having them up come Monday morning when the people came in. The only things we really couldn't do were some of the things which was dealing with those documents we had. We had to hold off on that until they were freeze dried. Unfortunately, it takes a period of time. So we sent out notifications to everybody what we had done. So that's it. The outcome, and I've kind of really touched upon it here, is that we were back in business. Most all elements were up come Monday morning. We were able to do, my department was back up. We had the computers back up on Sunday, and we tested them all. We made sure there were no problems. There was no water leaking or anything in there. That was significant. And then the recovery services company handled all the rest of the aspects for us. I think the whole process, if my memory serves me right, was about 4 months because of all of the mold and the asbestos, all that mitigation. It takes time. It's very tedious. You have to seal everything up, do this reverse airflow and all. It's daunting. So that covers that case. And then, like I said, we were up by Sunday, and we wanted to be safe and everything. We will cover all the documents, freeze drying. That was significant. And then we also got the insurance company that we were working with was so impressed at what we did and how we did it. They had this huge article they put out, and was actually, we had a lot of publicity on it from the insurance industry, not public. We didn't want to lay that out there, but they met with us. They go, wow. And they wanted us to write up our details of what we did and how we did it. They were very, very impressed with that. So that was significant. Okay, next steps. So this is me and my wife standing out there looking at the map, deciding what we're going to do. And so the next steps now for us, Leisure World, and you, I, and everybody else, what should we do? What should we do here? So get involved and learn ways you can protect yourself. If any of you have never been to the Emergency Preparedness Committee's meetings, what you'll hear them talk about is this is all of our responsibilities. We all have to partake in this. We have to look out for, number one, you, each of us. You have to decide, what are you going to do if something happens? It's really important. You can't go, oh, the trust will take care of this. Oh, my mutual will take care of this. There may be some things they'll help with, But from the individual level, like your medications and who's your emergency contacts, all of that, that's on each of us. And they have prepared some really nice documents. I think you've got a couple of them here. You've handed out some samples of those. It's really important to understand it's all of us. As I said, I put things in place, but I put it in place because I've learned over the years that I need to be more cognizant of it, of what I need to do. Have a personal plan for power outages, phone loss, groceries, medical interruptions. You know, I don't know if anybody heard of an organization called FEMA. I know there's questions of how that will continue in the future. But when a disaster occurs, this is kind of crazy, but I heard this not long ago. When a disaster occurs, they want to look at within specific areas of that are affected by this disaster. Let's take a hurricane, vast area. They actually have learned that certain businesses, whether they're open or not, tells them the severity of the event that happened. And it's interesting. One of those companies, you ready for this? The one is Waffle House. Waffle House has, it's hysterical. Waffle House has a plan that each employee knows. They have it so they store so much food ahead of time. They may go to different types of things served. They pre-grind all their coffee. They have all these things in place that they can come back up and do it. The other ones are Home Depot, Lowe's. They all have, so they can see if they're up, because why? In that event of that disaster, and something's happened to your home, what do you want to do? You want to fix it, right? Where are you going to go do that? Home Depot and Lowe's. So, and if you're hungry and you don't have anything, where are you going to go eat? So they figured it out. Waffle House figured it out, but Google it. You guys can look that up. You'll say, oh my God. Now, it's not the only thing FEMA does, and it's not the only measure they do, but it gives them a starting point to look at, because they actually code them red, yellow, and green as to whether it affects it, but crazy stuff. So anyway, there's things you can do. These documents they have can be very helpful to you. You really want to start taking a look at them and see how that fits for you. Keep contact and medical information updated. Make sure other people other than you understand what you've got and that you have something in place. Because in a severe catastrophic event, you may be in trouble if you don't think through this. So participate in readiness drills. When this comes into play, we as a community should set up that we test this. I remember when I went to school, we always had fire drills. We even had where I got under the daggum table when I was a kid because of fallout, you know? It was a drill, you tested. You kind of got people used to it, but you know, us doing these types of things, you really want to start looking at, you know, considering doing that. So checklist for personal. These are some things, this is a lot of what they've covered there, but there are things you want to take into consideration. There are things that I look at as personal, and I think you have this handout too, if I'm not mistaken. So I won't read it all, but you go over the go bag. That's a bag that you would set up and have available if you had to leave. It had the things on it you really needed, really badly. So you want to set that up, and then supplies list. And think about you, if there's somebody else in the house, and your pet. What would you do? Are you going to abandon your pet? You know, I don't know, but you know, you have to set your priorities and all, but I know I wouldn't. And then medical stuff, you want to have a certain number of days ahead of time. Not that 7 is necessarily enough, but at least it gives you some cushion that you can think about it. But if you stepped out, you had nothing, and now you don't know what to do, and you don't have time to think about it, this gives you a little bit of a cushion. So medical devices, you want to make sure you've got what you need. I know I'm one of the real distinct fortunate ones that has a CPAP machine. I have 2 of them. I have one that's ready to go, and the other's one on my bed. So if I need to grab it, I just grab it, go. And it's got everything in there I need. You want to make sure your neighbors, you know, exchange things with them, have it around. This is all around stuff, again, home preparedness, what you want to do. How do you turn your utilities off if you needed to? What would you do? You know, I don't know. You may or may not need to do that, but in case you did, communications, planning, alerts, how you do stuff. You know, meeting points. We had in all our disaster plans, we had places that by department, people were told to go meet. If it happened in there, you would say, okay, you go here, you meet, and then somebody took maybe a checklist of who was there, who was missing, and they try to figure out where they're at. And you need to do that soon, because you don't know where they're at. They're stuck in that building. They could be in serious harm's way. Community and mobility, you want to make sure you've covered all the different places. Where are the shelters on campus? Are there places you can go? Which I understand there are some clubhouses to some degree.
To some degree. I'm working on that. To
So,
your degree.
but that certainly wouldn't house 8,600 people, but on more localized thing, but and us tying our plan into what the county or the state and the federal are all doing, that all needs to be laid out there. So begin the process of planning for the plan, secure leadership commitment. This is now what the trust and all of us need to do. This needs to take place. You need to have leadership commitment to this. This can't be done in a vacuum, as I said earlier. Everybody's got to be on board. How are those people going to play out? Are they going to do it? And if they don't want to do it, well, we need to decide what are we going to do then, okay? But you need to think about that. Define scope and objectives. That's crucial. What is the scope of my plan? What are my objectives? What is it that I need this thing to do for me or not do for me? What are my expectations? And those expectations need to be realistic. If they're not, you're in trouble, because if they're not realistic, it's never going to work. You got to make sure that we can actually come into play. You want to look at, rapid recovery, stability, all these things got to be ready for you. Conduct a risk and impact assessment. This is what I was touching on earlier, is understand the risk. What's the probability of event A happening? How often might it happen? Will it ever happen? And if it does happen, what am I willing to invest in it to deal with it? And in some cases, there may be events that you'll go, I'll take my chances, or I will only do this part that might cover me under N percentage of the types of things that might happen. Everybody follow me on that? That's an important factor. So, so you want to make sure you do that. Identify essential functions and dependencies. You need to decide what absolutely, positively, no ifs, ands, or buts need to continue in this community. It may be nothing, it may be everything, it may be something. But you need to understand, and everybody's got to agree upon that. Because if you don't, it's going to be a mishmash. You're going to have all kinds of trouble. All right, establish roles and responsibilities. That's what I said earlier. You want to make sure you have people that are taking responsibilities. You want to back people up, because you don't know who's going to be around when something happens. And then the next one is develop communication plans. How are you going to talk to people? I touched upon that. That's something you also want to make sure you cover. Identify alternate resources and locations. So you want to look at all of that to make sure you've got not just one solution, but multiple. Draft a plan. That's the playbook. That's a lot of people call it the playbook. As a matter of fact, if you were to go out to Waffle House, they actually have it on the website, and they call it their playbook. That's their playbook that the employees all know, and they know exactly what to do with it. And it's straightforward, it's simple, but it allows them to do what they need to do to continue providing service and to stay in business, but providing essential service for those people affected. Because why? They're able to feed them. So seems like crazy stuff. Train and educate. You need to keep people educated and train the people that need to do certain things, teach them how to do it, and really think through this. It's very, very important. Test. You want to make sure you test and improve. When we had the disaster at this business, we did a deep dive afterwards. What did we do well? What do we do? What do we do awfully? Where could we improve? What are we missing? And update that thing, and you review it. And then when you go to test again, and by the way, we tested our plan at our hot site twice a year. Twice a year, I would take my department, most of them, we went out to the hot site and re-replicated our environment, and we brought it up. Not back at the office. We were now running at the hot site. So I knew when we had a disaster, if we declared a disaster and we were operating out of the hot center, we were working. It wasn't like, I think it's gonna work. We knew it worked. We knew exactly. And again, when we added applications or systems, we made sure they were tested too. Very critical. Okay. So that really covers my presentation. I want to thank you all profusely for attending, but I want to also show you a couple of key takeaways. Continuity plan, it helps protect your comfort, safety, and independence during disruptions. All of those are, one is just as equal as important as the other. Planning ahead, disaster playbook helps give you peace of mind knowing your community is ready to support you when the unexpected occurs. Each of us must plan ahead for our own needs, because when a disaster strikes, being personally prepared makes all the difference. I'm telling you, it's crucial, because if you can't do what you need to do to survive on your own to get things going, probably won't be too many people around to help you. Honestly, it's just the reality of it is. So you have to really look at that. Get my last one. Your participating is vital to success. So with that said, we're going to turn it off now, and I'll open it up to any questions, comments, suggestions. And really, you won't hurt my feeling. Whatever's on your mind, say it, and we'll take it from there. If you got it turned off, because we can't record that part.